Good morning and welcome to the KDPG Sunday edition. I'm Stacy Smith. The internet is the most liberating tool for humanity ever invented and also the best for surveillance. It's not one or the other. It's both. Those were the thoughts of John Perry Barlow, probably best known as a lyricist for the Grateful Dead and also a cyber libertarian and founding member of the Freedom of the Press Foundation. Now, one piece of information we found on the internet also transformed society, but have the changes come too quickly for its users? This past week, Mark Zuckerberg, the founder and CEO of one of the internet's most popular sites, Facebook, faced two congressional hearings about its own privacy crisis. Kenneth Craig of CBS has more on the showdown on Capitol Hill.
Mark Zuckerberg told Congress he himself is a victim of the privacy scandal that has shaken Facebook.
Was your data included in the data sold to the malicious third parties? Your personal data?
Yes.
It was.
The 33-year-old CEO faced a second day of questioning about how personal information from millions of users got into the hands of British consulting firm Cambridge Analytica. Members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee suggested Facebook needs more oversight.
This incident demonstrates yet again that our laws are not working.
Self-regulation simply does not work.
We need some rules and regulations.
Zuckerberg did not disagree.
The internet is growing in importance around the world in people's lives, and I think that it is inevitable that there will need to be some regulation.
But he cautioned too much of it could strangle smaller startups.
I think that these are all things that need to be thought through very carefully.
Zuckerberg stayed calm as Congress members pressed for answers.
Are you willing to change your business model in the interest of protecting individual privacy?
Congresswoman, I'm not sure what that means.
He assured lawmakers the site is going through tens of thousands of apps to make sure they didn't misuse data. But he admitted it's a process that will take many months. Kenneth Craig, CBS News, New York.
This morning on the KDPG Sunday edition, what is behind the Facebook controversy? Will there be more regulation of the internet? And how could that affect users and internet companies? A little later in this program, we will be joined by Dr. Karen Paulette, Professor of Computer Information Systems at Robert Morris University. Right now, we welcome our first two guests. Greg Zegarelli is founder and managing shareholder of the Technology and Entrepreneurial Ventures Law Group with offices in downtown Pittsburgh and also Upper St. Clair. Also with us is Dr. Norman Sadeh, a professor of computer science at Carnegie Mellon University and co-director of CMU's Privacy Engineering Program. CMU has conducted special research about the impact of Facebook on society. David Shribman, the executive editor of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, is away this week, so John Allison, the editorial page editor, joins us for this morning's discussion. I want to welcome both of you for the KDPG Sunday edition, and thank you for joining us this morning. This testimony obviously was a big deal in the nature of where we stand. Was it, in the end, that big of a deal? Did we learn anything more that we should have known or didn't know?
Well, we've learned a few things, and obviously Facebook has recognized that certain things didn't happen the way they were supposed to. They've clearly taken some measures already, but there are also deeper questions that are emerging from what we've heard over the past 2 days and also what we've observed over the years through our research. There's a huge amount of data being collected. People don't necessarily realize everything that's being collected about them. Some of the controls that are available to users have improved. Facebook has actually made a very significant effort over the years to improve some of the controls that they make available to users, and yet you look at what you have available today and it's still very confusing, it's still extremely challenging, and then beyond that there's a lot of data that's being collected without people's awareness, without people's consent, and that's obviously the source of a lot of the things that we've heard about this week.
Should people have been surprised that Facebook was collecting all this data?
I don't think they should have been surprised. Most of the data that was collected was pursuant to terms and conditions where people actually accepted the application and allowing the application to access their respective data. So I'm not sure there should be so much surprise. I think what the hearings did do was expose the common person's vulnerability to having that data accessed. So on the one hand, you tend to accept terms and conditions, but on the other hand, the understanding what you're giving away or what you have a right to tends to not be fully exposed.
So I think that's absolutely correct. And then beyond that also, if you look, for instance, at the Cambridge Analytica situation, the data that was collected was not just the data of people who participated in those surveys, but also data about their friends. And those people had absolutely no idea that their data is being collected. So you've got this deeper issue, which really was not really addressed properly, as far as I'm concerned, in the hearings earlier this week, as to how about all these other people whose data is being collected, including people who are not even on Facebook, who don't necessarily even have Facebook accounts.
I want to get into that aspect of in just a moment, but you do bring up the Cambridge Analytical situation. Well, first of all, I want to go back to one of the things you said. I think we are probably all very guilty of going to a website or having an app downloaded onto our phones or our computers or something like that, and there is a user's term, lease agreement or whatever the heck you call this thing, and I'm going to say that probably the majority of people either scroll through it very quickly or don't even scroll through it and just go hit accept. Am I correct on that?
I think that's commonly true.
So I would disagree with the term that you've used. You said guilty. I don't think that we can blame users for not reading privacy policies. Those privacy policies are just way too long. Some colleagues of mine at Carnegie Mellon have actually done some calculations to see how much time you would have to devote to reading all the privacy policies just of the websites that you interact with during the course of the year. And the statistics are absolutely staggering. So you would have to probably spend about 2 months every year just reading these privacy policies. So it's highly unrealistic.
And also understanding what that term, legal terminology is.
Absolutely. And most people do not understand. We have also done research on that. And it's very easy to see that even when you pay people to read privacy policies and you ask them some basic questions, they struggle answering those questions even after reading the text.
You're an attorney. Is that fair to the person who's doing this?
Is it fair to write terms and conditions that...
To expect the person to accept or decline something like that?
Well, first of all, I think the paradigm of accepting terms and conditions is part of the system, right? If you're going to join a membership, and then you need to at least understand or have read what are the purported terms and conditions of that membership, of that relationship. So when you go onto Facebook, you generally accept terms and conditions, and it's your responsibility to understand them. Now, the reality is, I think what Dr. Soudet is saying is, the reality is because the terms and conditions are complex, that the ordinary person does not in a empirical way tend to understand them all. And I think that's a case-by-case basis. I will say there are companies that the terms and conditions are so complex. They're web pages that refer to web pages that refer to other web pages that they're very difficult to navigate.
How can you even opt out of one aspect of them?
Good point.
The other way. Now, about Cambridge Analytica, I'm not a fan, but isn't it true that in the early part of their research, it was acceptable under Facebook to you sign up for that app, and then they could get access to your friends? I mean, that wasn't necessarily illegal.
That's correct. So Facebook allowed for this, and very shortly thereafter, they changed actually their policy because they realized that was somewhat extreme. What was clearly unacceptable is to collect data for research purposes and then later on selling that data for commercial purposes and for the use that we know.
But I think that we do have to, from a legal perspective, we have to follow an evolution and a maturity of an industry. So for example, 30 years ago when I began my practice, the way you would write a technology contract and the terms and conditions, because there was no industry standards 30 years ago, that the terms were very heavy and tended to be more complicated. As industries mature, customs develop. So some of the terms, privacy is a very fast-moving industry, right? So when you write terms and conditions this year, they may be heavy and complicated, and as customs are derived from activity, then you sometimes can rely on those customs. So it moves very fast, and I can't really say that it's Facebook's or large corporations' fault that the terms are heavier then and a little lighter now.
So I think that obviously privacy policies are written for lawyers, at least in the case of larger companies, and they're written to primarily protect companies. On the other hand, when you look at the user side of the equation here, and we've done a lot of research at Carnegie Mellon looking at privacy policies, looking at what people are able to understand, there's really a need to simplify the text of these privacy policies. There are lots of examples of methodologies that have been developed that can actually organize the content of these policies and make them much easier to understand by users. So there's clearly a need to move in that direction. There's also a need, I believe, to separate what people already expect from what they don't expect. A privacy policy like the one of Facebook or Google or some of these other major companies might be as long as 5 to 10 pages. There is no way that someone is actually going to read that, and most of what they're going to read is not necessarily going to mean very much to them. Could we somehow potentially highlight those things that they care about, those things that they would be surprised about? That's what we really need to do. So there's a need to go beyond just the text of these privacy policies.
Before the segment ends, I would like to ask you this, because we said that the CMU has conducted special research about the impact of Facebook on society. Can you summarize some of what that impact is?
Well, I can try to summarize it. So it's very clear that Facebook appeals to a very significant segment of the population. It enables them to communicate in ways they've not been able to communicate before. We've seen over the years, there's a colleague of mine, Alessandro Acquisti, who's carried research over the years to actually see trends and how people have gone about interacting with these different privacy settings over time. So as people start to realize somewhat that all this data was being collected and potentially used in ways that they were not necessarily very comfortable with, we've seen a tightening of some settings. So there's certainly been a movement in that direction. We've also seen an effort by Facebook to improve the usability of some of these settings, and all that is good. But you continue to find that a lot of people will come to regret posting information about them. You're going to continue to find that a lot of people are extremely surprised about what's being done with their data and how much data is actually being collected as they interact with these sites. And that's the core of the issue that I think we're here to talk about.
We go back to the original issue with the Cambridge Analytica, and it was started because of a survey that people could opt into. They said, yeah, I'll take this survey, and it asked questions about themselves. That was the data that was collected. They talked about their friends in this survey as well, and then that's what Cambridge Analytica was able to glean information from for its purposes. Since people went into that on their own, can they really blame anybody else? I mean, can they say, oh, well, gee whiz, I didn't know that data was going to be used?
So I would feel a little bit less sorry for the people who took the survey as far as collecting the data they provided in the survey and collecting some additional data that was expected to be collected as part of that survey. But what happened beyond that is, number one, this data, which was collected originally for research purposes, was also used for an entirely different purpose. And most importantly, affected by this survey, so the people who took the survey were about 270,000, if I remember correctly. But at the end of the day, millions and millions of people saw their data being collected and used for entirely different purposes, with these people not providing consent for that data being collected and not obviously being aware even that this collection was taking place.
Right. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us for the first part of our program today. And you'll be back with us, Mr. Zuccarelli, and we'll continue the KDPG Sunday edition in just a moment.